"You're trespassing." That's the first thing the HOA Karen screamed before she called the cops on me at my own ranch. She served me a 72-hour eviction notice for the land where I spread my wife's ashes, and then she smirked as a deputy put me in cuffs. She thought she was just another bully pushing a grieving man around. But she had no idea she just declared war on the one person in the country who oversees every single HOA, and I was about to shut her entire operation down permanently. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you believe homeowners should never be terrorized by a clipboard tyrant, hit subscribe, because you're about to see justice served cold. The dust from the long gravel drive still hung in the air when I killed the engine. For 3 months, my world had been fluorescent lights and stale hotel coffee, auditing HOA charters from coast to coast. But here, the air was clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. This wasn't just a ranch. It was the last piece of my wife, Sarah, that I had left. Her family had worked this land for a century. Every knot in the wooden porch rail, every stone in the creek bed, held a memory. I was home. I stepped out of the truck, ready for the familiar creak of the cabin door, the quiet hum of the land settling for the evening. Instead, I was met by a woman in a neon yellow vest, standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed over a clipboard. She was filming me with her phone. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "A lost tourist, maybe." "You're on restricted property," she announced, her voice sharp and loud, like she was talking to someone hard of hearing. "This is a designated HOA zone, and you are not an authorized party. I need you to vacate immediately." She took a step forward, blocking the path to my own front porch. Her name tag read, Denise Mallory, President. I'd never seen her before in my life. The HOA out here was a new thing, something cobbled together by a few newcomers who thought the countryside needed more rules. I'd gotten the welcome packet in the mail a year ago, but figured it was mostly for the new tract homes on the other side of the ridge. My land had been in the family since before the county road was even paved. "Ma'am, I think there's a misunderstanding," I said, holding up my hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm Jack Ryland. This is my property." I walked to the truck cab, pulled the deed from my glove box, still in its original protective sleeve from when Sarah's father had passed it to us. I held it out. "See? Ryland family. 60 years. She didn't even glance at it. Her eyes scanned my property with a look of pure disgust. "While you were gone, the association board voted to reassess ownership rights based on multiple code violations. Your presence here constitutes trespassing." She pointed a manicured finger toward the small lake behind the barn. "That boat dock, for example, is an unapproved structure." My blood went cold. That dock was where Sarah and I had sat on 100 summer nights. It was where we'd watched her hair grow back after the first round of chemo. It was the last place her feet touched the earth before we spread her ashes on the water. My throat tightened. This woman wasn't just talking about wood and nails. She was trampling on holy ground. I took a deep breath, fighting back a wave of anger that felt like a physical blow. "Calm, Jack. Be calm." "Look, Denise," I said, my voice lower now. "Why don't we start over? I've been away. If there are things that aren't up to code, I'm happy to fix them. Let's do a walkthrough. You tell me what you see, and we'll make a plan." I was offering an olive branch, trying to be the reasonable neighbor. It was a mistake. Treating her like a rational person was a mistake. She let out a short, ugly laugh. "A plan? The plan is for you to leave." Without breaking eye contact, she pulled out her phone again, but this time she dialed. "Yes, I need the sheriff's department. I'm at 1422 Ridge Road. I'm the HOA president, and we have a hostile squatter who is refusing to vacate private property. He's becoming aggressive." My mouth fell open. Aggressive? Squatter? The lies were so blatant, so effortless, they left me speechless. I watched her describe me to the dispatcher as a potential threat, and I felt a switch flip inside me. This wasn't about rules. This was about something else entirely. A county sheriff's car pulled up 10 minutes later, kicking up the same dust my truck had. A young deputy got out, his hand already resting on his sidearm. Denise rushed over to him, her voice a frantic whisper, pointing at me. The deputy's face hardened. He approached me with the caution he'd use on a cornered animal. "Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back." "Deputy," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my ranch. I have the deed right here." I gestured, with my head toward the truck. "We can sort that out later. Right now, I need you to comply." Before I could say another word, he had my wrists in handcuffs. The cold metal clicked shut. The humiliation was a hot flash that ran up my neck. I was being arrested on the porch, where I'd held my wife's hand as she took her last breaths. Through the cruiser's rear window, as he guided me into the back seat, I saw her face. Denise Mallory wasn't looking concerned or relieved. She was smirking, a thin, triumphant smile that said, "I won." And in that instant, sitting in the back of a police car, on my own land, I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. And she had just started a war she had no idea how to fight. The deputy finally took the cuffs off me once we got to the station, but the damage was done. My name was on a report, and Denise Mallory was now the victim in the eyes of the law. They held me for a couple of hours while they verified my identity, a process that mysteriously took forever. When they finally let me go, the older sheriff, a man named Tom Lewis, with tired eyes and a deep-lined face, walked me to the door. "Look, Mr. Ryland," he said, his voice low. "I read your statement, but her paperwork looks official. My advice? Get a lawyer." He sounded like a man who was just trying to get through his shift without any more headaches. I didn't blame him, but I also knew that lawyers cost money and time, two things Denise was about to make sure I ran out of. When I got back to the ranch, she was waiting. Not alone this time. 2 others were with her, both clutching clipboards like shields. A nervous, fidgety man who wouldn't meet my eye, and another woman with the same hard, entitled expression as Denise. They were conducting what she called an emergency compliance inspection. I stood on my own porch and watched as they paced my land, pointing and scribbling. It was a complete sham. Every note they made was a carefully crafted lie designed to break me. The big floodlight on the corner of the barn, the one I installed for safety after a mountain lion was spotted nearby, light pollution exceeds community standards. The gravel on my driveway, improper, aggregate size, potential for washout. I nearly laughed out loud when the fidgety man wrote a violation for my fence line being excessively straight, which he claimed created an unnatural visual barrier. But the laughing stopped when Denise marched over to the lake, her boots sinking into the soft earth. She pointed at the dock where Sarah and I had spent our last summer. "Severe structural decay," she announced to her clipboard army. "Immediate safety hazard, unauthorized construction. It was built from solid oak by Sarah's grandfather. It was stronger than her own house." I saw a few of my neighbors watching from their properties, dots of color in the distance. They saw the sheriff's car earlier. They saw this ridiculous inspection crew. But no one came over. No one made a call. I saw old Hank Carter, who'd ranched the next plot over for 50 years, standing by his fence. He looked over, caught my eye, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was a silent message. "I see you. I know what she is." Then he turned and went inside. He knew as well as I did that to interfere was to invite the storm to his own doorstep. Denise had them all scared into silence. When Sheriff Lewis pulled back up, responding to another follow-up call from Denise, I decided to change my approach. Arguing about property deeds wasn't working. It was time to show him who I was. I walked over to his cruiser, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. "Sheriff," I said calmly, "I appreciate you're in a tough spot. I know you're just following procedure." I reached into my wallet and pulled out my federal identification. It wasn't flashy, just a simple card with my picture and a government seal. "I'm the National Director for the Federal Homeowner Association Oversight Committee. My job, for the last 20 years, has been to audit organizations exactly like this one when they get out of line. I handed him the ID. He took it, his eyebrows shooting up as he read the title under my name. His whole demeanor shifted. The tired, procedural cop was gone, replaced by a man who suddenly realized he might be on the wrong side of something big. He looked from the ID to Denise, then back to me. His gaze was sharp, questioning. For a single, fleeting second, I felt a surge of hope. The system was about to work. That hope died the moment Denise noticed the change in him. She moved with the speed of a predator, sensing its prey might escape. She got close to the sheriff, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper I could barely hear, under internal review, using his position to intimidate. We were warned this might happen. The poison was immediate and effective. The sheriff's face clouded over with uncertainty. He handed my ID back, his expression now unreadable. "This is a civil matter, sir. It's out of my hands." Denise's smirk was back, wider than before. She had won this round, and now she was moving in for the kill. "Sheriff," she said, her voice now loud and performative, "this abandoned truck presents a clear safety issue." She pointed at my Ford F-150. "I want it towed." Then she turned to me, holding up a freshly printed sheet of paper. "And here is your preliminary fine schedule. It's $500 a day for the unapproved dock, $200 for the non-compliant gravel, and $100 for the lighting violation. Fines begin accruing immediately." She was hitting me where it hurt the most, my savings. A few weeks of those fines, and I'd be ruined. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. She thought I was just some broken-down widower she could roll over and bleed dry. She thought she had all the leverage. And then she delivered the final blow. She stepped right up to me and slapped a document against my chest. It was a formal notice. I had 72 hours to vacate my property, my home. Her eyes were gleaming. It wasn't just business for her. It was pleasure. The 72-hour notice was a ticking clock, but Denise didn't wait. The harassment began the very next morning. It started with a high-pitched whine that cut through the dawn quiet. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee and saw it. A small, black drone hovering just beyond my property line. Its camera lens, a dark, unblinking eye pointed directly at my house. It was her, of course. She was sitting in a lawn chair on the edge of her own property, a remote control console in her lap, conducting compliance checks. The invasion of privacy was so profound it felt like a physical touch. All day it was there, buzzing like a mechanical mosquito, recording my every move. When I went to the barn, it followed. When I walked down to the lake, it hovered over the water, its shadow passing over the spot where Sarah's ashes had settled. Later that day, her 2 clipboard flunkies were back, this time taking soil samples from my front yard. They dug up little plugs of earth and put them in plastic baggies, labeling them with a marker. When I walked out and asked what they were doing, the fidgety man mumbled something about unauthorized fertilizer compounds before scurrying back to his car. Denise watched it all from her lawn chair, a queen overseeing her siege. Each new violation was delivered with a theatrical flair. She'd march to my mailbox, slam the little red flag up, and make sure I was watching from the window as she stuffed another envelope inside. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, and she was enjoying every slice. The second morning, just as the sun was starting to paint the sky, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Hank Carter, my old neighbor, holding 2 steaming mugs. He was a man carved from old wood, tough and weathered, and his eyes held a deep, quiet anger. "Figured you could use this," he said, handing me one of the mugs. "She's a piece of work, that one. Came over here from the city a few years back, thinking she could pave paradise." We stood there on the porch, watching the drone make its morning rounds. "The rest of 'em are scared," he said, not looking at me. "She's fined half the folks on this road for something. Fined my Martha for the color of her garden gnomes. While she was in chemo," he took a long sip of his coffee. "Just want you to know, you ain't alone in this. Not really. That small act of kindness, that cup of coffee, felt like a lifeline in a churning sea. It was a flicker of hope, a reminder that community wasn't dead, just dormant. That hope lasted for about 10 minutes. As Hank was walking back to his property, Denise's car screeched to a halt beside his old, rusted-out pickup truck. She hopped out, clipboard in hand, and started yelling loud enough for me to hear across the field. "Hank, this vehicle is in clear violation of Article 7, subsection B. Excessive rust is an aesthetic nuisance." She slapped a citation onto his windshield. Hank just stood there, his shoulders slumped, and looked back at me. His expression was one of profound defeat. She wasn't just fining him. She was punishing him for talking to me. She was making an example of him, and the message to everyone else was clear. Stay away from Jack Ryland. That night, I hit my lowest point. I stood on the porch, gripping the worn wooden rail so hard my knuckles were white. The ranch felt like it was slipping through my fingers, sand by sand. Every drone flight, every bogus fine, was an attack on Sarah's memory. This was our sanctuary, the place we built a life and faced its end together. Now, this bitter woman with a clipboard was turning it into a battlefield, poisoning the very air I breathed. My daughter, Lisa, called, her voice tight with worry. "Dad, just sell it," she pleaded. "It's just land. It's not worth this. It hurts too much now." Her words were meant to help, but they felt like a betrayal. Sell the ranch? It was like she was asking me to sell my own heart. I hung up the phone, feeling more alone than ever. For a moment, I actually considered it. Maybe she was right. Maybe the fight was already lost. I looked out at the dark silhouette of the barn against the stars, the faint shimmer of the lake beyond it. I felt Sarah's presence there, in the whisper of the wind through the pines. I couldn't walk away. I wouldn't. I had been trying to fight Denise on her turf, playing by her fake rules. I'd been acting like a homeowner. It was time to stop. It was time to be the man I was before I came back here to grieve. I went inside, the feeling of despair replaced by a cold, quiet calm. I didn't call a lawyer. Lawyers file motions, they argue. This was past arguing. I called my old assistant from my D.C. office, a woman named Maria, who knew where every digital body in the country was buried. "Maria," I said, "I need access. Everything you have on a small HOA in Northern California, the Ridgeview Estates Community Association." I didn't tell her why. I didn't have to. She knew my voice. After that, I made 2 more calls. Not to lawyers, to regulators. Men I had trained, men who owed me favors, men who understood that the thickest rulebook in the world is useless if a bully is the one holding it. Then I opened my laptop. The eviction notice sat on the table beside me, its 72-hour deadline mocking me. I ignored it. I navigated to the national database, the one I had helped design a decade ago. It contained the charter, bylaws, and financial disclosures for every registered HOA in the United States. I typed in Ridgeview Estates and hit enter. Her paperwork loaded onto the screen. It all looked official, just like the sheriff had said. The corporate seals, the board member lists, the endless pages of rules and regulations. But I wasn't looking at the rules. I was looking at the structure, and as my eyes scanned the lines of dense legal text, I saw something, a tiny detail, a name, a connection I hadn't expected. Something in her founding documents, filed 3 years ago, smelled fundamentally, deeply wrong. It was a crack in her fortress, and I knew right then it was just big enough for me to tear the whole thing down. The first crack in my resolve didn't come from a drone or a fine. It came through the phone, in the voice of my daughter, Lisa. She was a nurse, practical and kind, and she hated seeing me in pain. "Dad, I spoke to a realtor," she said, her voice gentle, but the words hit me like stones. "He said the market out there is strong. We could sell it, pay off whatever bogus fines she's cooked up, and you could move closer to me. We could find you a place with a nice yard." I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the barn, my knuckles white on the phone. "Lisa, this is our home," I managed to say, my voice raspy. "It was home, Dad." she corrected softly. When Mom was here. Now, it just hurts you. Every time you look at that lake, you're not just seeing Mom. You're seeing this horrible woman trying to take it. Let it go. Please. The line went quiet. She was crying, and her tears cut deeper than any of Denise's manufactured violations. She wasn't just asking me to sell land. She was asking me to sell my last connection to her mother, because the fight was breaking me. And the worst part was, I couldn't tell her she was wrong. The next day, Denise escalated her campaign from harassment to public humiliation. Taped to the community bulletin board down by the main road was a new notice, laminated and official-looking. At the top, in big, bold letters, it read, "Warning, dangerous non-compliant owner." Below it was my name, my address, and a list of my supposed crimes. Structural hazards, environmental contamination, refusal to cooperate. It was pure fiction, written to look like a public health alert. It was a scarlet letter, designed to turn every last neighbor against me. And it worked. The few who had still offered a hesitant wave when I drove past now stared straight ahead. Cars that used to slow down now sped up. The isolation was absolute. Hank's truck stayed parked in his driveway. The whole world had shrunk to the boundaries of my property line, and outside it, I was a pariah. Denise had successfully painted me as a threat to the very community my family had helped build. That was the breaking point. The combination of my daughter's plea and my public shaming hollowed me out. I got in my truck and just drove. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to get away from the accusing silence of the ranch. I ended up at the edge of town, parked in the gravel lot of a dusty old diner. The sign in the window of the realty office next door seemed to mock me. "Let us find your forever home." I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. I had the number for the realtor Lisa had mentioned. My thumb hovered over the call button. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was a losing battle. The ranch wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a wound. Every sunrise brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Every memory of Sarah was now tainted with the image of Denise's smirking face. What was I even fighting for? A piece of dirt that was causing my own daughter pain? I closed my eyes, ready to press the button, ready to surrender. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. I drove back to the ranch, defeated, intending to pack a bag and leave, just to give myself some space to think. I sat down at the kitchen table, the eviction notice a stark white square in the dimming light. I felt a cold, empty despair. But underneath it, a single thought, hard as a diamond, began to form. How? How was she doing this? How did one woman with a clipboard and a mean streak get so much power? My professional instincts, buried for weeks under a mountain of grief and anger, began to stir. I wasn't a homeowner anymore. I was an auditor. I opened my laptop one last time, not looking for a fight, but for an answer. I pulled up the HOA's charter again, the one I'd glanced at before. I ignored the pages of petty rules and went straight to the incorporation documents, the boring, structural stuff nobody ever reads. And that's when I saw it. The little crack I had noticed before widened into a canyon. The Ridgeview Estates Community Association wasn't a standalone entity. It wasn't a simple neighborhood group that had gotten out of hand. On page 12, in the fine print, it listed a corporate parent company. It was structured like a franchise, a local branch of a much, much larger organization. An organization called Consolidated Community Management, a name I knew as well as my own. I stood up from the table and walked over to my work bag, the one I hadn't even fully unpacked. I pulled out a leather-bound folio. Inside was a list of the 40 largest HOA management corporations in the United States, the ones whose operations were so massive they fell under direct federal oversight. My oversight. My eyes scanned down the list, and there it was. Number 7. Consolidated Community Management. They weren't just a company I knew of. They were a company I was personally assigned to oversee. Every single one of their charters, their financials, their regional boards, they all funneled up to a system that I managed. A wave of ice-cold clarity washed over me, pushing away all the despair, all the fear, Denise Mallory thought she was the queen of this little hill. She had no idea she was just a troublesome employee in a global corporation, and I was the guy they sent to deal with troublesome employees. I looked out the window, toward her house. The porch light flickered on. The fight wasn't over. It hadn't even started. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table, and whispered into the quiet of the room, "Karen, you picked the wrong guy." The next morning, I didn't waste time with coffee. I sat down at my laptop. But this time, I wasn't a homeowner fighting an eviction. I was Director Jack Ryland, logging into the secure federal portal. With a few clicks, I initiated an official, top priority oversight audit of the Ridgeview Estates Community Association, citing credible reports of governance, malpractice, financial irregularities, and homeowner harassment. The request shot through the system, not to Denise, but to the legal department at Consolidated Community Management's corporate headquarters in Chicago. To them, it wasn't a request. It was a command. A fire alarm was now blaring in a skyscraper 1,000 miles away, and Denise had no idea she was the one who had pulled the lever. My 72-hour eviction notice was still on the table. It was now just a piece of paper. The real clock had started ticking for her. I began my work with the foundation of any organization, its charter. It's the birth certificate of an HOA. I pulled the original document filed with the state. Just as I suspected, it had a 5-year renewal clause. That was standard. I cross-referenced the renewal date with the county clerk's records. Nothing. It had expired 6 months ago. Legally, her entire HOA didn't exist. It was a ghost organization with a clipboard. Every fine she had issued since that date, including the one she slapped on Hank's rusty truck, was void. That was the first nail. Next, I moved to the elections. HOAs, even ones run by tyrants, have to pretend to be democracies. I pulled their board election records. The bylaws, approved by corporate, required a full community vote every 2 years. I accessed the archived meeting minutes. For the last 5 years, there hadn't been a single real vote. Instead, the minutes showed the same entry over and over. Board members, Mallory, Griggs, and Peterson, reappointed by unanimous consent of the current board. They were a self-appointed council, renewing their own power in a closed room year after year. Trevor Griggs, that was the name of the fidgety man with the clipboard. I made a note of his name. People like that are the first to crack. Then came the part that always brings them down: the money. With my access, I didn't have to ask for their financial records. I could pull them directly from the parent company's servers. It didn't take long to find the big mistake. Their operating budget showed a significant line item for community enhancement projects, things like road resurfacing and park maintenance. But when I checked the county records, none of that work had ever been done. The money was just gone. It had been moved into a secondary account, a consulting firm registered to a P.O. box. And the owner of that firm? Denise Mallory. The second nail, the third, and most important nail, required leaving the house. I drove into town and made copies of a simple, one-page form I designed myself. It was an affidavit, a sworn statement, asking people to list any fines they had received, the reason, and the date. I didn't post it on the community board. That was Denise's territory. Instead, I went to Hank. I found him in his workshop, fixing a tractor engine. I explained what I was doing, not as a desperate neighbor, but as a man with a plan. His eyes, which had been clouded with defeat, lit with a hard, sharp glint. He took a stack of the forms without a word. By evening, my kitchen table was covered. Hank had worked quietly, neighbor to neighbor. People who were too afraid to talk to me were not afraid to talk to him. I had sworn statements detailing fines for overgrown rose bushes, holiday decorations left up 2 days too late, a basketball hoop with a frayed net, and a car parked in disharmony with the driveway's aesthetic flow. I cross-referenced every single fine with state law. As I suspected, more than 90% of them were completely illegal. The state had clear limits on what an HOA could fine for and how much they could charge. Denise had ignored all of it. Now I had a pile of signed, dated evidence of systematic extortion. That evening, as I was collating the documents, Denise's drone made its usual pass. She was probably wondering why I wasn't packing. She started yelling from across the street, her voice shrill with impatience. "You think the rules don't apply to you, Ryland? You have 24 hours left. The sheriff is coming back tomorrow." I didn't answer. I didn't even look up. I just kept working. The lack of a reaction seemed to infuriate her more than any argument. She was so used to people cowering. Silence was a language she didn't understand. But across the country, people who mattered were not being silent. An hour later, as I was putting the final touches on my report, my laptop pinged. It was a new email, a forward from a contact deep inside CCM's corporate office. It was the email I had been waiting for. It had been sent from their chief legal officer to a short distribution list. One of the names on that list was Denise Mallory. The subject line was in all caps: Mandatory Emergency Board Meeting. Tonight, 8 p.m. The body of the email was short and brutal. A corporate parent representative was flying in to attend. Attendance was not optional. And then, the final line. The line that told me the game had changed for good. Agenda item, HOA. Review of governance and compliance issues raised by Federal Oversight Director Jack Ryland. She knew, her bosses knew, and now she knew that I was coming for her. The community hall was a small, drab building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, but tonight it was electric. Hank had spread the word. Every chair was filled. Neighbors who had been avoiding eye contact for days were now packed in, shoulder to shoulder, whispering, their faces a mix of fear and angry hope. Dozens of phones were already out, their small, red recording lights blinking in the dim room. This wasn't just a board meeting anymore. It was a reckoning. At the head of a long folding table sat Denise, flanked by her two clipboard allies, Trevor Griggs and the other woman. She was trying to look bored and in control, her chin held high, but a small muscle in her jaw was twitching. Seated at the end of the table was a woman I didn't know, in a sharp business suit, her face a mask of calm professionalism. This had to be Marcy Wells, the corporate representative. She wasn't looking at Denise. She was looking at the crowd, her expression as cool and detached as a surgeon's. When I walked in, the room went silent. Every head turned. I didn't go to the public seating. I walked straight to the empty chair at the table, directly opposite Denise, and set down a single, thick file folder. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine panic cutting through her arrogant facade. Denise banged a small gavel on the table. "This emergency meeting has been called to address a clerical inquiry from our corporate parent," she began, her voice straining to sound normal. "We'll begin with a statement from—" Marcy Wells cut her off, her voice quiet but carrying the authority of a judge. "Actually, Miss Mallory, we'll begin with Mr. Ryland. He's the one who requested this audit." She turned her cool gaze to me. "Mr. Ryland, the floor is yours." Denise's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The script had been flipped before she even got to her first line. I stood up and took the microphone. I didn't look at her. I looked at the faces in the crowd. "My neighbors, my name is Jack Ryland," I said, my voice steady and clear. "For the last few days, many of you have seen me be treated like a criminal on my own land. You've been told I'm a dangerous man who doesn't follow the rules. Tonight, I'm here to talk about the rules, the real ones." I opened the folder. "First," I said, holding up a document, "this is the official charter for the Ridgeview Estates Community Association. As of 6 months ago, it is expired. Legally, this HOA does not exist. Every fine, every notice, every violation issued since that date is invalid." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. "Second," I continued, placing another document on the table, "let's talk about elections. According to the bylaws your parent company wrote, This board is required to hold public elections every 2 years. Records show that hasn't happened in 5 years. This board wasn't elected by you. It was appointed by itself, in secret. The murmuring grew louder, angrier. Trevor Griggs, the treasurer, was starting to sweat, his eyes darting between me and Denise. Third, I said, my voice dropping slightly. The money. I held up a bank statement. This year, you all paid for a road resurfacing project that never happened. That money, your money, was transferred to a private consulting firm, a firm owned and operated by Denise Mallory. Gasps erupted from the crowd. It was one thing to be bullied with fines. It was another to be stolen from. I saw the moment the room turned. It was a physical shift, people turning in their seats to glare at the head table. The fear that had held them in check for years was burning off, replaced by raw fury. Finally, I picked up a thick stack of papers, the affidavits from Hank. And these are for you, I said, walking along the front row, handing stacks to the crowd. These are statements from your neighbors. Fines for sick wives, for children's toys, for the color of flowers. A systematic campaign of harassment and extortion. Suddenly, Hank's voice boomed from the back of the room. He was standing, his face red with a rage he'd held in for too long. She fined my wife while she was in chemo, he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. For garden gnomes. A woman in the front row shot to her feet. She came into my garage without permission, said my oil stains were an environmental hazard. One by one, they stood up, their voices joining a rising chorus of grievances. She threatened to tow my son's car on his graduation day. She made me rip out the porch swing my father built. The room was exploding. Denise, her face pale and blotchy, finally found her voice. She leaped to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. Lies! He hacked the records. This is a personal vendetta because he couldn't follow simple rules. The accusation was so desperate, so pathetic, it was almost laughable. But before I could even respond, Marcy Wells, the corporate rep, stood up. She tapped the microphone, and the room fell silent. No, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. He didn't hack anything. She turned and looked directly at Denise, her eyes devoid of any warmth. Miss Mallory, this man is Jack Ryland. He's the federal director who oversees all of our HOAs, nationwide. He doesn't need to hack the system. He is the system. The air was sucked out of the room. The public humiliation was total and absolute. The neighbors stared, their mouths open. Trevor Griggs looked like he was about to be physically sick. Someone in the back whispered, "You're done." Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up, phones held high, recording the beautiful, perfect collapse of a petty tyrant. Marcy Wells let the silence hang for a moment longer, then delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, Denise Mallory is suspended from all duties, pending a full forensic investigation by our office. Denise stared at her, her face a mask of disbelief and rage, and then, without another word, she turned and stormed out of the hall into the night. Losing power didn't humble Denise Mallory. It made her unhinged. The suspension, the public shame, it was like kicking a hornet's nest. Instead of disappearing, she went rogue. Stripped of her official clipboard, she started a campaign of petty terror. She plastered social media with bizarre, rambling posts, accusing me of being a government agent sent to destroy the community. She printed up fake public contamination notices, nearly identical to her old HOA violations, and left them on people's doors in the middle of the night, warning them about my illegal agricultural runoff. It was the desperate thrashing of a drowning woman, and while most people just shook their heads and threw the notices away, it kept a current of poison flowing through the neighborhood. The final overreach came just before 2 a.m. a few nights later. My porch camera, which I'd left running ever since the drone incident, sent an alert to my phone. I pulled up the live feed. There she was. A shadowy figure slipping through the darkness, moving with a frantic, furtive energy. She cut the chain on my front gate with a pair of heavy bolt cutters, the snap of the metal loud in the night air. She wasn't just trespassing, she was breaking and entering. She stalked past the house and made a beeline for the barn, the bolt cutters still clutched in her hand like a weapon. I didn't know what she planned to do, vandalize my equipment, harm my animals, but I knew I had to stop her. I made only one call, Sheriff Tom Lewis. I didn't yell, I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, "Sheriff, it's Jack Ryland. The woman you warned me about is on my property right now. She's at my barn, and she's carrying bolt cutters. My camera is live streaming the whole thing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then just 2 words, "I'm coming." I walked out onto the porch, phone in hand, keeping the camera feed open. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there in the shadows and watched as she fumbled with the heavy lock on the barn door. She was muttering to herself, her words lost to the wind, but her rage was a palpable thing, a dark energy corrupting the peace of the night. Headlights cut through the darkness at the end of my driveway. Sheriff Lewis wasn't running sirens, but he came in fast. He parked his cruiser at an angle, bathing the entire scene in the stark, unforgiving glare of his floodlights. Denise froze like a deer, her hand on the lock, the bolt cutters dangling from her other hand. She squinted into the light, blinded and exposed. The sheriff got out of his car, slow and deliberate. He walked past me on the porch without a word and stopped about 20 feet from her. He saw the cut gate chain. He saw the bolt cutters in her hand. He saw the wild, cornered look in her eyes. He had been played for a fool once by her lies and whispers. He wasn't going to let it happen again. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 30 years of seeing people at their worst. "Denise, turn around. Put your hands behind your back." There was no argument this time, no fake paperwork to wave in his face. There was just the undeniable, recorded truth. He cuffed her right there, in the same spot where her fake inspection had begun, and led her to his cruiser. The same cruiser I had sat in just days before. As the red and blue lights finally flashed to life, washing over the ranch, I felt the tension drain out of me, a physical weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The war was over. The justice was final and real. In the days that followed, the dominoes fell fast. Consolidated Community Management fired her officially, citing gross misconduct and embezzlement. With the evidence from my audit and the neighbors' affidavits, the district attorney pressed charges for trespass, vandalism, and multiple counts of fraud. The Ridgeview Estates HOA was placed into full receivership, with me appointed as the temporary volunteer administrator. My first and only official act was to authorize a full refund of every illegal fine she had ever collected. Checks went out the next week. The ranch began to feel like itself again. The air was cleaner, the silence deeper. A few days later, Hank and a couple of the other ranchers came over. They said the old dock, the one Denise had called a hazard, could use some new planks. We spent the afternoon working together under the warm sun, tearing out the old wood and laying down the new. We didn't talk about Denise. We talked about the weather, about fishing, about the price of hay. We were just neighbors again. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the lake, Hank pointed to the new trail that ran along the water's edge. "We ought to name that," he said, "after Sarah, so everyone remembers what this place is really about." I could only nod, my throat thick with emotion. The new rules for the community were written by the residents a month later at a potluck dinner on my lawn. They were simple: be a good neighbor, respect the land, and mind your own business. Bullies hide behind clipboards and fake authority, trying to feel big by making others feel small. But real power, the kind that lasts, is a good neighbor showing up with a hammer or a cup of coffee, no questions asked. That's the kind of power that builds a community. That's the kind of power that lasts forever.